Between 2012 and 2018, in the struggling working-class neighborhoods of Ecatepec, Mexico, several young women vanished without a trace. The police initially ignored their families' claims that they had disappeared, but evidence began to surface, leading the police to the most macabre and disturbing of discoveries. Who were these missing young women, and who was the monster behind their diabolical disappearances? Hello, and welcome to Shades of Murder. I am your host, Alita Caldwell. In this podcast, I discuss cases of murder from around the world and throughout history, attempting to unravel the layers of darkness that help make humans into monsters. This is a special warning to those of you who may be particularly sensitive. This episode contains extremely graphic and violent content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Over 6 years between 2012 and 2018, when females disappeared amongst an impoverished, crime-ridden neighborhood in Ecatepec, Mexico, a city lying about 2 hours outside of Mexico City. The local police weren't particularly concerned, much less invested in what happened. In the town of Ecatepec, girls and women face a significantly high risk of becoming victims of trafficking, rape, exploitation, and homicide. It's a dangerous existence to be a female anywhere in the country, but especially in this town, with corrupt law enforcement, misogynistic cultural imprints, and the power of the drug cartels reigning fear over the people. It comes as a little surprise that the safe whereabouts of these young girls and women were not prioritized. But for the loved ones of these missing individuals, they never stopped fighting to find them. Together, several mothers of the young missing women would join forces. When the daughter of Maria Guadalupe, 22-year-old Arlette, vanished one day in April 2018, the police didn't take her case seriously. They forced her mother to wait 3 hours before allowing her to file a missing persons report. An officer then spoke to the frantic mother for about 5 minutes and instructed her to return to the station the following morning if Arlette still hadn't come home. They claimed the case was active, but months passed and no progress was being made. Then another young woman in the neighborhood disappeared. The police did nothing to locate her either. Then September came, and yet another woman disappeared in the neighborhood. Again, the police did little to nothing to find her. This is when mothers of 3 of the missing women decided to unite and figure out what happened to their missing children. Their daughters were all young, single mothers with long dark hair and brown eyes. One day, while speaking to a local tabloid reporter, Arlette's mother, Maria Guadalupe, learned that 2 of the missing women had answered an ad that was placed in the newspaper for second-hand clothes from someone in their neighborhood. When the mothers looked over their daughters' phone calls and texts, they realized that all 3 of them had a number in common. Arlette Samantha Algun, 22, Evelyn Rojas Matas, 29, and Nancy Naomi Hatrun, 28, had all been contacted by the same person. Nancy's 2-month-old daughter had unfortunately accompanied her that day, and her grandmother was desperate to find her. The number had been registered to a woman named Patricia Martínez Bernal. But who was this woman? She and her husband Juan Carlos Hernández, along with their 4 small children, resided in the same neighborhood. The couple was known for selling different items out of their home, including cell phones, perfume, cheese and corn, and secondhand clothing. This investigative circle of mothers didn't know them personally, but they unearthed a direct connection to several of the missing women, one of which was strangely close. The parents of a 13-year-old girl who had recently disappeared were tight family friends with Patricia and her husband Juan Carlos. So close, in fact, that Juan and Patricia, along with their children, had lived with the family for a while. When the teenage daughter went missing, Juan and Patricia immediately pointed fingers at one of their neighbors. The mothers gathered all these notes and information and immediately brought them to the police. The mothers, along with the reporter, brought all their documentation into the detectives, but the prosecution claimed they did not have enough evidence to arrest either one of them. But then something shifted in the investigation, and the police began to probe into this suspicious couple's behavior. When officers spoke with their neighbors, they told the police that they observed bizarre behavior around the couple and their home. They often would leave the house at bizarre hours, sometimes pushing a baby stroller. Inside, their home had almost no furniture. Instead, it was covered with cardboard boxes and black plastic bags. Neighbors also said that a foul smell lingered over the vacant lot the couple owned, and sometimes revolting smelling fluids would spill into the gutters outside. Law enforcement could no longer justify continuing to ignore the alarming connection between the missing women and this bizarre couple. Officers soon established a surveillance on Patricia and Juan, who lived in Jardines de Morelos, known as a large working-class neighborhood in Ecatepec. Officers watched and waited for months. From April through the beginning of October, officers staked out their every move, hoping for a sign of their criminal involvement, a reason to warrant their arrest. Then on October 4th, 2018, everything in the case changed. The couple was seen leaving their residence pushing a baby stroller, but it was believed that the couple had older children. This set off an immediate alarm to the police, who believed the missing woman Naomi's 2-month-old baby may be inside. Officers took no chances and swarmed the couple, arresting them immediately. When an officer lifted the blanket covering the stroller, a baby wasn't inside. Instead lay an oddly shaped bundle wrapped in black plastic. As the police tore open the package, they were appalled at what lay within: a human torso. Detectives certainly never expected to catch the couple red-handed with such grotesque evidence. This shocking, horrifying discovery led officers to immediately search the couple's properties. Time wasn't on the women's side, especially the babies, and homicide detectives had no idea the horrors that awaited them. The couple confessed soon after being arrested that they had planned to dump the body parts inside the baby stroller at their vacant lot. As officers searched the property, they located 8 buckets, large plastic buckets, all filled with concrete. The concrete was promptly broken apart, but officers weren't prepared for what lay inside: human organs encased in the concrete. When investigators searched the couple's house, they found more bundles wrapped in black plastic inside the refrigerator. By then, the police weren't that surprised, that shocked at all, to find more grisly evidence of the couple's crimes. A medical examiner would later identify the remains belonging to 8 different women, but unfortunately only 4 of the victims could be properly identified with DNA. When news broke about the well-known, friendly family neighborhood parents being behind multiple women's disappearances and deaths, the community was outraged. They were absolutely furious that law enforcement had not taken these victims' families' concerns and claims of something bad happening to them seriously. Over 1,000 residents united together, marching the streets, demanding justice for these victims and protection from violence. Juan Carlos Hernández, 33, and his wife, Patricia Martínez Bernal, 38, were arrested on suspicion of multiple homicides. The couple was held in custody at Chicanalta prison while an investigation was launched into their gruesome and deeply disturbing crimes. As they sat in the interrogation room, the depths of their depravity began to unfold. The known 8 victims were only the beginning. The serial killer couple would confess to having murdered at least 20 women over the last 6 years. Their first victim was in 2012. According to the police and the psychiatrist appointed by the court, the couple had a tried and true modus operandi in which the wife Patricia was the bait. The ruse was simple and highly effective. Juan Carlos initially pretended to be a legitimate salesman. He would call up women in the neighborhood and initiate contact, telling them about the secondhand clothing, cell phones, and wine that he offered in his catalog. If the women expressed interest, he then provided them with his wife Patricia's phone number to make them feel more comfortable, at ease. Patricia then would invite the women over to their house so they can see the items in person. Other times the couple would place want ads in the newspaper for housekeepers. The moment these females would enter their residence, it was already too late. Like a finely tuned web, time and time again, they would almost effortlessly lure in their victims into a trap of torture and horrendous death. When a girl or woman showed up to inquire about the housekeeping position or to see the blouse in person, Patricia insisted they try on. The husband Juan Carlos would ambush them. In disbelief and caught off guard at becoming victims, these young girls and women would easily be overpowered by Juan Carlos, who then would sexually assault them. When the husband was done with his assault, he would grab his knife and slit their throat, or slash them over and over until they bled to death. And other times he would kill them first, before sexually violating their bodies. It wasn't just Juan Carlos who committed the murders. Patricia eventually confessed to the police to having stabbed at least 2 of their victims to death. Their first victim was a 22-year-old woman who was lured to their house with the hopes of the housekeeping position. When the young woman arrived, Juan Carlos forced her into the bathroom. He assaulted her and then killed her. Juan Carlos then cut off her head and proceeded to dismember the rest of her body. Patricia swore to the police that she kept all of her children outside of the house while the murder occurred. After Juan Carlos dismembered their first victim, Patricia went to the kitchen and made tamales out of her flesh, and together they consumed their first victim. Their second victim was Luz, a 13-year-old girl who was addicted to inhalants. This sadistic couple promised to give her some money, and she came over to the house willingly. This poor little girl was raped, beheaded, and dismembered like the victim before her. Patricia went to the kitchen again and cooked the girl's flesh with oil and salt. She and her husband together ate their second victim that night. When Luz's father searched for his missing young daughter, Juan Carlos offered a helping hand. The investigation would reveal that the couple's youngest victim was only 7 years old. They had lured in her mother, Guadalupe Castillo, whose daughter had sadly come with her that day. Juan Carlos assaulted and murdered Guadalupe, and then held the small girl captive for over a week before he finally suffocated her. Juan Carlos and Patricia also tossed their victims' bodies into nearby rivers and dumped their bodies into the buckets found later on their vacant property. The 13-year-old girl, Luz, they had killed was the same one whose family had opened their home to them and their children when they needed help. They threw her body in a sewage canal. This couple's crimes were cold, calculated, methodically planned, devious, and downright diabolical. The atrocity and darkness of their actions chilled even the most tainted of detectives. In little time, Juan Carlos and Patricia would be given, or rather labeled, a much-deserved serial killer moniker of their own, the Monsters of Ecatepec. Juan Carlos admitted that his actions were motivated by his deeply profound hatred of all females. His disgust and rage toward women is what led him to murder them, sexually violate and dismember them. He never acknowledged or addressed why his wife Patricia was an exception to his hatred. Juan Carlos never bothered to pretend that he had any remorse, much less guilt, over what he had done. He openly admitted to committing at least 10 femicides, and he informed criminal investigators that a deeper investigation into his crimes would reveal at least 20 victims. Juan Carlos also told the police that it would be next to impossible to discover all of them because he sometimes cut up the bodies into tiny little pieces. The only decent thing Juan Carlos did during the investigation was reveal the whereabouts of Naomi's 2-month-old daughter. She was living with a couple who confessed to having purchased the infant for 15,000 pesos from Juan Carlos and Patricia, which is around $700 US. The baby's mother, Naomi, had been one of the last of their victims, and instead of killing the baby, the couple decided to profit from her. Thankfully, the child was found safe and returned to her grandmother soon after. Ironically, before Juan Carlos Hernández was sent to prison, he made a bizarre request to law enforcement officers. He stated, and I quote, "If you're going to present me to the media, will you allow me to shower and put on a suit? Because I'm not some filthy criminal." That clearly shows the extent of what a narcissistic psychopath Juan Carlos really is. Court-mandated psychiatric examinations would later determine that Juan Carlos suffered from personality disorders as well as psychotic. No surprise there. There is no documented reason as to why Patricia willingly participated, even engaged at times, in the brutal assault, slaying, dismemberment, and cannibalism of their victims. As we have heard in many cases where a female has committed the most horrific crimes, along with a male perpetrator, Patricia was painted in a less evil light. The Mexican police did believe that Juan Carlos held a strong psychological control over his wife. I find it infuriating that time and time again, female offenders are either given a pass or deemed as abused, manipulated, and psychologically controlled by the men in their lives. It is offensive and wrong on multiple levels. First of all, females have proven over centuries that they can be just as calloused, calculated, psychotic, and demented as any male offender. Secondly, from a feminist criminological perspective, which is a legitimate theory in criminology, females are not weak-minded, gullible, fragile creatures that are so vulnerable and susceptible to men's power over them that they are willing to kidnap, torture, kill, dismember, and eat victims just to please the man in their life. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule. There are cases of extreme abuse and manipulation in which the female offender has been forced to or feels they are forced to commit horrific crimes amongst the man in their life because they are terrified they will also be killed. But even in a male-dominated and abusive, controlled relationship, can that possibly justify their actions? In the case of Patricia and her husband Juan Carlos, there was zero evidence that he ever manipulated, controlled, or abused her in any capacity. She never claimed he forced her to do anything at all. What is known about this serial killer's background reveals a complex, dark, and very abusive environment. Their paths would cross one another and manifest their shared rage, trauma, and violence into acts that can only be described as evil. Born in Ciudad Lázaro Cárdenas, Michoacán, Mexico, initially assigned to the Mexican Army, Juan Carlos soon found himself working a string of mediocre, low-paying jobs, including as a garbage collector, clothing vendor, and waiting tables. In 2008, Patricia was working as a waitress in a cantina Juan Carlos frequently patroned. They struck up a conversation, and soon after found themselves in a relationship. Although Juan Carlos bragged about being an assassin, Patricia agreed to move in with him. Soon after, they got married and eventually had 4 children. The deeply seated hatred and misogyny expressed by the male offender of these crimes had their origins in a similar place as many other notorious male serial killers do. It all began with his mother. Juan Carlos told investigators and psychiatrists how as a child his mother was a prostitute and she forced him to watch many sexual acts she performed with men. He also claimed that his mother dressed him in girls' clothing when he was a small boy. At some point when he was still a small child, Juan Carlos was sexually abused by a woman when he was in her care. Not only was Juan Carlos a victim of horrible abuse and neglect by females in his life, but he also shared a similar trauma. He had a brain injury as a small child, which we have seen in many cases of serial killers. When he was 10 years old, Juan Carlos fell down the stairs. Given the circumstances of his upbringing, I would assume he never received any medical treatment. According to some reports, although the specifics have never been verified, the woman Juan Carlos truly and deeply loved, who was not his wife, Patricia, disappeared or possibly simply abandoned him in 2012, shortly before the mass killings began. Needless to say, the severe abuse, neglect, and trauma Juan Carlos suffered at the hands of the women in his life created an absolute monster. And in Patricia, he would find his perfect match. Born with borderline intellectual disability, Patricia was also known for being highly manipulative. From what is known about this woman's childhood, I think it would be more fair and accurate to say that she did whatever she had to do to survive. And over time, the abuse, neglect, and trauma she experienced also turned her into a monster. It led her to the darkest of paths. This is not to condone her behavior on any level. Nothing ever can justify this kind of violence. But it can't be dismissed that, like Juan Carlos, Patricia also had a horrific life. Patricia claimed to have been a victim of physical and sexual abuse since she was as young as 6 years old. At one point, she found herself homeless on the streets and began stealing and selling her body to survive. But soon her actions became more ominous. She would rob and drug her clients, which led to some of the men dying. Based on her behavior and her proactive participation in the abductions, murders, dismemberment, and even consumption of the victims' remains, I think it would be safe to say that she enjoyed the power, the control, the violence, and the thrill of killing. For once in her life, she was in power, and it likely gave her a very strong sense of personal gratification to become the perpetrator for once in her life rather than the victim. The couple operated feverishly, collecting at least 3 of their victims between April and September of 2018. As most of us are aware, it is highly unusual for serial killers to behave in such a way. To murder this many people in such a short period of time is not common modus operandi, especially given the fact that they were luring in and killing as many females as possible in the same neighborhood they lived in. Research on female and male serial killers have shown very distinct patterns between typical behavior and modus operandi. Women who commit serial murders tend to function like spiders, which is why female serial killers are often associated with black widows. They almost always lure in, trap, or slowly kill and consume their victims, usually by some kind of poison or opposed accident, who are frequently those closest to them, like their family members and their children. In stark contrast, male serial killers operate like distant but leering predators, watching, stalking, and traveling around often to select their victims, who are almost always strangers. This couple used these distinct male and female serial killer behaviors and modus operandi. This serial killer couple was very rare because they combined these behaviors and patterns so that they could successfully operate for an extensive period of time, right under the nose, so to speak, of both their neighbors and the police. Serial killers have unique motivations, reasons for wanting to kill. The typology of serial killers has long been established to help criminal profilers, investigators, and psychiatrists to help understand the complex motivations and what may trigger their violence. Why this serial killer couple viciously hunted and killed at least 20 females doesn't neatly fit into one of the typologies. However, their criminal typology has been classified as hedonistic, mission-oriented, and highly organized. Juan Carlos Hernández was, at his core, was a mission-oriented serial killer with intense misogynistic traits. He deeply and inherently hated all women, and this hatred, rooted in his trauma, abuse, and abandonment, manifested in his mind a mission to kill. During his interviews and confessions, Juan Carlos Hernández stated how his goal, his target, was to murder at least 100 women as his personal crusade. This mission to rid the world of females fueled his need, almost his obsession, to have absolute power and domination over every part of their bodies, which he exerted over them by raping them, torturing them, killing, mutilating, and even eating some of them. This power and control, in return, provided him with extreme personal gratification, both psychologically and sexually. This serial killer couple, despite the fact that they were uneducated and poor, and at least in Patricia's case, suffered from intellectual disabilities, were intelligent and highly skilled manipulators. They have been described as organized serial killers. Their modus operandi was consistent, repetitive, never straying far from the original strategy. The couple also maintained absolute control over the crime scene. They used the same system of cleaning and containment, whether in the refrigerator or dumped at their vacant lot inside the buckets. These were the primary reasons why they were never suspected of committing any crimes, much less multiple homicides. Together with Patricia's proactive luring in of new victims, Juan Carlos was able to fulfill his ultimate predatory wishes. This couple's motivations went far beyond extreme sexual sadism and encompassed thrill killing and what has been described as utilitarian commodification. This was demonstrated by the fact that they utilized every part of the victim. They did whatever they could to make profit from the kill, including selling their belongings, trading or selling body parts and bones to local practitioners of Santeria, and even selling one of their victims' infants. Juan Carlos Hernández wasn't only a misogynist, a venom-filled woman-hater, and a sadistic psychopath, but he was also delusional. He believed he was a demon and claimed that he needed to drink human blood at least every 3 months. The couple claimed to have a pseudo-religious or ritualistic justification behind the murders, directly tied to their worship of Santa Muerte. They practiced dark magic and made a promise, a sacrificial offering to Santa Muerte, that the last 4 hearts belonged to her. But then one of their dogs ate one of the 4 hearts, which they believed led to their downfall. There was strong evidence, as seen on social media posts as well as through their confessions, that the couple engaged in sacrificial rituals centered around the religion of Santeria, or what one may believe Santeria encompasses. But the fact is that, similar to many non-Christian religions or beliefs, Santeria is grossly misunderstood. Santeria, meaning the way of the saints, is commonly associated with dark witchcraft, known as brujeria in Spanish, and voodoo, but it isn't quite either one. A religion developed by enslaved people throughout the Spanish Caribbean, it is a unique combination of Catholicism and Yoruba traditions of present-day Nigeria. Colonists in Cuba labeled the practice as a form of dark magic to villainize the religion, and thus its practitioners, to justify enslavement and maltreatment of the people. Some practitioners claim that the influence of Catholicism was more about the inclusion of it in order to get away with practicing it, so they would not be punished for their faith. instead of it being a genuine component. In other words, by associating their beliefs, their spirits, with Catholic saints, the community of Santeria practitioners could hide their true rituals and beliefs under the guise of approved Catholicism. Following the Cuban Revolution of 1959, Santeria spread into the United States and other parts of South America. In the late 20th century, Santeria became increasingly associated with related religions such as Haitian voodoo and Brazilian candomblé. An estimated several 100,000 initiates around the world, primarily found in La Habana and the Matanzas provinces of Cuba, and in the Cuban diasporas of the United States and Mexico. Santeria teaches the existence of Olodumare, the transcendent divine being, the ultimate, and Ake, which is the supernatural force in the universe that Santeria initiates believe can be manipulated to help the believer in their life through ritual action. Under the creator Olodumare are spirits, also known as orishas, their number which is unknown or at least not agreed upon. They have been described as being similar to Catholic saints. Orishas provide wisdom and spiritual guidance to their followers, and initiates believe that every person has their own, or even multiple, orishas. This personal connection to the orisha or multiple orishas directly influences one's personality and character. It is through interaction and worship of these spirits that an individual grows, gains wisdom and insight, and understands how to improve themselves and their lives. It helps them define and understand their higher purpose. Reaching out and connecting to the orishas is commonly done at altars, whether at home or at an ile, which is a house temple. These house temples are ran by santeros or santeras, also known as priests or priestesses. To be a member of the house temple, one must be formally initiated by the santero or santera. Offerings are made to the orishas and can include something as simple and everyday as like flowers or fruit, or could be liquor or an animal for sacrifice. During a central ritual known as the Toque de Santo, practitioners sing, dance, and drum with the purpose of encouraging spiritual possession of one of their members. Divination is commonly used to decipher messages sent by the spirits. Rituals involve herbs, talismans, and a focus on healing is an important element of the religion. The religion of Palo Mayombe, which also has roots in West African culture and Catholicism, sometimes does use human skeletal remains in the rituals. They are placed within ritual cauldrons, also known as nagangas. These cauldrons are filled with various ritual items to represent its origins, such as stones, coins, glass beads, in addition to animal and human bones, which may explain why the two religions are confused with one another, and why both have been directly associated with dark witchcraft and voodoo, contrary to popular belief, which is often perpetuated by a biased and uneducated media, both fictional and otherwise. Santeria does not condone the use of human sacrifice. Santeria does not involve human remains or bones, but it often does use animal sacrifice to pay tribute to the orishas. the majority of organized religions, including pagan ones, such as Wicca. Santeria does not hold any core rules, practices, and it also has no sacred text. Santeria is highly decentralized. It has no specific boundaries, nor does it answer to a bureaucratic form of authority, such as the Pope. And because of this, it doesn't carry any responsibility as to how a house temple or a practitioner operates. Over time, it has borrowed and incorporated elements of all kinds of different religions, both Christian, New Age, and pagan. In fact, adherents or initiates of Santeria may consider or acknowledge themselves to be many different types of religious beliefs. They may consider or acknowledge themselves as being Roman Catholic, Hindu, Voodoos, or even Jews. This leaves the faith widely open to interpretation, and thus the rituals and practices do vary greatly. But again, nothing in the religion or faith itself promotes or condones any kind of human sacrifice or the need for any human bones in ritual. When a self-proclaimed practitioner or initiate of Santeria uses the bones of humans, this is not a reflection of the religion, but rather the demented mind of the individual practicing it, or in this case, multiple persons. There are many cases of homicide around the world, but in particular in areas of Latin America and the United States, that portray the sadistic rituals and practices of the killer as belonging to the ways and faith of Santeria. But this is a cultural and religious bias and discrimination that unfairly links the religion to acts of cannibalism, human sacrifice, and murder to the faith, and not anything relevant to its teachings. It is for all these reasons that Santeria has developed an often dark, obscured, mislabeled, and often ominous reputation. This case took an unsettling turn of events when a video was leaked to the media that fully presented, in glaring detail, the hatred Juan Carlos Hernández felt towards women. In the video, the serial killer is seen casually sitting in his chair, wearing handcuffs, a black t-shirt, and jeans. He openly admits to being completely sane and well. Over 12 minutes filmed, he goes on a rant about his mother being a whore, bragging about his intelligence and how many women he's had sex with. He is also visibly seen sobbing in his chair until his whole body shakes with emotion and rage, spilling the details of his life story, the reasons behind the horrifying crimes, his unrelenting hatred and fury toward all women. In the video, Juan Carlos Hernández speaks matter-of-factly to the officers and the psychiatrist, stating, and I quote, "I prefer that my dogs eat the flesh of those women than that they continue to breathe my oxygen. Let my dogs and the rats eat 1,000 times over. Let them keep walking around." He also coldly stated how if he were released, he would continue killing women, no matter the vile filth that continued to spill from the serial killer's mouth. Does not negate the fact that this interrogation video being leaked was in direct violation of his human rights and the legal process. there was a real possibility that the charges would be dropped and a judge would release this sadistic psychopath back to his community. On the morning of October 11th, only minutes before the couple's first hearing in court, the community came together and fought back. The victims' family members, friends, acquaintances, and neighbors joined together because they were desperate to make sure these monsters never saw a day of freedom. The women of Mexico had had enough of the lack of action and absence of protection by the local police and the government as a whole. They walked through the neighborhoods where these young women and girls were hunted down and killed, chanting and holding up signs with "Ni uno más," meaning not one more femicide victim. They stood together in front of the Chiconota prison where the couple had been held. Family members spoke to various media outlets, demanding justice for their daughters. They, along with the members of the community, demanded that the judge hold the couple accountable for their evil actions to the fullest extent of the law. In 2019, the couple stood trial separately on multiple crimes, facing individual rulings for each count. They were both found guilty of 8 counts of femicide, in addition to other crimes, including hiding human remains with the purpose of concealment and human trafficking. The judge handed them down multiple sentences in prison. Their penalties would exceed 327 years in prison. In February 2021, a judge sentenced them both to a formal life sentence, specifically for the 2012 femicide of 13-year-old Luz del Carmen Miranda. Although the couple had confessed to upwards of 20 women being killed, and it was believed this demonic couple was behind the disappearance and murders of as many as 50. The prosecution had the strongest evidence for their 9 victims. It may not have been justice for all of them, but the court ensured, they guaranteed, that these monsters would never have the chance or accessibility to harm another woman again. Although their atrocious crimes certainly should have been eligible for the death penalty, the country of Mexico fully abolished capital punishment since 2005. But at least their sentences did reflect the depravity of their crimes. When Juan Carlos Hernández was sentenced to life, Arlette's mother, Maria Guadalupe, called him out for the coward he was, specifically because he only murdered women. To this, he replied, he's also killed men. It is unknown if the investigators ever learned who his male victims may have been. This brave, angry mother also confronted her daughter's killer, telling him, "My daughter was a queen, unlike the nameless thing at your side, who calls herself a woman and is an embarrassment to our gender." To this, Juan Carlos Hernández said to her, "Your daughter is never coming back." Maria Guadalupe stated to reporters that she didn't understand how she had the strength to confront this monster without breaking down. To me, it sounds like the spirit of Arlette, the strength of her daughter, was with her mother that day. It is deeply unnerving to think about how this serial killing couple was raising 4 young children while actively doing the horrific, grisly crimes in their own home. When the couple was arrested, the children were ages 1, 4, 6, and 10 years old. All of the children were immediately removed from the home and placed into the protection of child welfare services, and their identities and current living conditions to this day remained under strict legal protection. The couple claimed, specifically their mother Patricia, that the children were never present during the killings, and unlike their dogs, they never fed their children any of the victims. However, there is little doubt that these poor young children, at least in some capacity, must be scarred for life. One can only hope that they were young enough and not exposed to too much of the macabre madness in that house, and are now thriving in loving, safe, and healthy homes. This case is shocking, appalling, absolutely revolting, but unfortunately, this extreme degree of sexual violence toward females in Mexico is not an exception. For too many girls and women in Mexico, it has become the norm, a daily battle they face. Females in Mexico are at a significantly high risk of becoming victims of rape, torture, and homicide, including by the hands of a serial killer, in a country that is overwhelmed with police corruption, the cartels, and a culture that is deeply embedded in misogyny and an elevated sense of machismo. Femicide is not defined by merely the killing of a girl or woman. It is the murder of a girl or a woman because she is female. These gender-based motivations or reasons include the killing of a girl or a woman in connection with their being sexually assaulted or kidnapped. It is the murder of a female preceded by abuse, stalking, or harassment. It is the murder of a female by her intimate partner. It is a murder that is characterized in which the victim suffers the sexual violence, injuries inflicted on a female's body with the sole purpose to desecrate and degrade her, even in death, and the killing of a girl or woman in which her body is displayed in a public place. Femicide is a global crisis, perpetuated by the patriarchy, colonialism, misogyny, and a lack of equal rights and opportunities for females around the world. Girls and women are targeted, assaulted, murdered, and their bodies mutilated, and even frequently displayed in public places, so that the community, even their family members, can see them. South America has some of the highest rates of femicide, and Mexico is one of the worst. Since 2001, there has been, on record mind you, not necessarily accurate, 50,000 females killed in Mexico, year after year, even with significant changes made in the law and increased visibility of this ongoing crisis of gender-based violence. Nothing seems to change. In the early 2000s, this ongoing epidemic in Mexico became front-page news and fuel for feminist protests and revolutions across the country, when hundreds of unsolved murders around Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, were finally brought to the media's attention. The term feminicidio was first used in association with this crisis, with 400 murders of females occurring between 1993 and 2005 in Juarez. this impoverished, highly corrupt city, which lies on the border of El Paso, Texas, is today embellished with little pink crosses that one can see from across the desert. Law enforcement tends to believe that these crimes are overwhelmingly committed by the cartel. These brash, horrific demonstrations of power and violent control over the country. Others attributed this violence in Juarez to sex trafficking, neglect by law enforcement, extreme levels of domestic abuse, and all-around deplorable living conditions. All of this is true, and much of the gender-based violence can be associated directly with the cartels. However, under this presumption, this guise, it has allowed for an environment to exist and fester in which the most sadistic predators operate, knowing that they are highly likely to never be caught. Too many of these females' deaths have involved savage, often bizarre, ritualistic elements that are more indicative of a cult or a serial killer rather than the cartel. Body parts cut off, other women's bodies found with symbols carved into their flesh. And even odder is how some girls and women appear to be dressed and posed after they've been killed, with some women unexplainably wearing multiple layers of clothing. Ecatepec has since replaced Juarez as the epicenter of femicide and gender-based violence in the country. With over 1.7 million residents, it's a very large suburban city. With its proximity to Mexico City, it's become a sinking hole of poverty and violence. Over the years, it has risen above Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, in total reported numbers. And like Juarez, Ecatepec also suffers from the same systemic dangers and failures to protect its girls and women. Part of the problem lies in the way Ecatepec is spread out. It's subdivided, and it encompasses large, vast territory, expansive spaces of land, where many of its residents have to travel into Mexico City for work. There are literally no streetlights in the town. People have to cross vacant lots, sometimes at night, alone. It has become an ideal hunting ground. An advocate for the feminicide crisis was quoted as saying, "Ecatepec is a trash can for human beings, a dumping ground for corpses." In October 2014, before the serial killing couple was caught, authorities decided to clean up a particularly rank-smelling canal that ran through the city. When the canal was drained, they discovered the bodies, or body parts, of 21 women. In 2015, femicide became a legal term in Mexico. This judicial ruling mandated that authorities investigate every violent death of a female as a potential femicide. But as we have heard many times in law enforcement, especially in cases that involve marginalized victims, the reality of the law, specifically how the prosecutors and police apply the law, doesn't necessarily lead to any justice. The records are full of holes and inaccuracies. The data also revealed that of the femicides that are known to have been committed, 95% receive impunity. Impunity means that the perpetrators face no punishment, no penalty, no risk of being harmed. They are free from any form of punishment. Ironically, Ecatepec was one of the first municipalities in Mexico to be placed under this femicide alert. also known as alerts de género. The law also required that the police proactively pursue steps to combat the crisis, including elevated training and better technology. A search unit was established in 2016, which has since successfully found 500 people. In Ecatepec, Mexico, 180 women were killed in the first 8 months of 2018, making it one of the deadliest regions throughout Mexico. In the first half of 2019, the bodies of at least 20 women murdered were discovered on the street corners, sidewalks, and the common vacant lots there, known as baldios. Even near a public park, the twisted violence and mutilation of females can be found. Officers found a daughter and mother there. Both women had been raped and decapitated. Other women's bodies in the city have been found, hacked to pieces, disposed of, thrown away like trash in sacks. The scenes of horror and dismemberment became a frequent sight for both officers and the residents of these communities, a common horror show to be exposed to. Since 2015, the femicide rate in Mexico has increased by 137%. For those who are identified as perpetrators of these crimes, only 2% of cases will ever end in a criminal conviction. The case of the Monsters of Ecatepec was a true exception to the legal justice females receive in the country of Mexico, a rare anomaly in the law and in the societal and legal norms of what they call justice, which too often treats female victims as if they are disposable. Every day in Ecatepec, Mexico, 10 girls or women are murdered simply because they are female. I know this has been a rough, absolutely sickening case, but it's a very important one to share. These girls and women have been marginalized enough in their lives. They deserve to have their faces and their stories be told, the importance of this crisis shared, and for everyone in the world to listen and pay attention to the horror that has become so much of these women's daily existence. Thank you so much for listening to the Monsters of Ecatepec. If you enjoy what I do and want to support the show, please make sure you are following or subscribed on your listening platform of choice. Consider leaving a rating and a review. Your feedback and support truly makes a huge difference to me and the show. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, I would love to hear from you. Please reach out. You can find my contact information in the episode description. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for shades of murder happening in the streets, next door, and especially inside your own home. Shades of Murder is created, researched, written, and edited by Alita Caldwell. Original music Stranger, composed by Stereo Code.